I want you to meet Danni Mohammed, founder of GentleForce, a creative and innovation practice that works with some of the biggest brands on the planet. And she does all this with just 2 job titles.
We have practice leads and practitioners. I hate job titles. I think they get in the way.
But here's what's strange. You'd expect a company built on creative chaos, on deliberately making people feel uncomfortable, on riffing and rethinking and tearing ideas apart, to feel pretty intense to work in.
The team have talked about the space being really calm, really easy to connect with co-workers, really open, really welcoming. We've got people that I'm proud of that have been here since the beginning, so nearly 5 years. And they're here and they're talking about the future. And I think they're really proud that they've been part of something that is, that they're building that's different.
So today we're asking, what if the traditional job title structure isn't defining your people, instead is actually the thing that's holding them back?
Hello and welcome to Truth, Lies and Work, the award-winning podcast where behavioural science meets workplace culture, brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network, the audio destination for business professionals. My name is Leanne, I'm a chartered occupational psychologist.
My name is Al, and I'm a business owner, and we are here to help you simplify the science of work. Danni Mohammed has spent her career at some of the world's most recognised creative companies, Saatchi and Saatchi, Veeden and Kennedy, Adidas, WPP. This is all before founding GentleForce, now 5 years old. Along the way, she's been described as having night vision, the ability to see possibilities in the dark that others simply can't.
And the structure she built at GentleForce is genuinely radical. There's no layers of creative directors and account managers and heads of this and that, just 2 titles. And the culture's so calm, her own team keep using the same word to describe it, even though the work itself is deliberately, productively chaotic.
So after this quick break, we'll find out why Danni chose just 2 job titles, how she balances creative chaos with actual client delivery, and whether her model could work outside the creative industry. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Danni Mohammed. I run and have founded a practice for creativity and innovation called GentleForce, and we're nearly 5 years old.
There's a lot of different things about this particular venture you're involved in compared to previous ones. One of the ones I noticed was that you don't seem to like job titles. Have I got it right? You've only got 2 in GentleForce.
Yes, 2 in the front end. We have practice leads and practitioners. I hate job titles. I think they get in the way, and many of them can limit potential. And I think also on the flip side, or on the other side of it, it can feed ego. And actually, what we're there for is to do some great work. And that's what we should be focusing on.
I believe the 2 job titles are practice leads and practitioners. Now, to the untrained ear, that sounds like the same thing to me. So what are the differences?
So we work in the creative and design industry and innovation industry, and we're coming up with ideas, we're problem solving. And so really it's about our craft. So we have strategy, design and creative are the sort of 3 main disciplines that we provide as a service to clients, whether that's brand strategy, brand transformation, that sort of brand building, creative concepts, campaigns, content, design identities, all that sort of stuff. And really anyone who's doing any of that is a practitioner, and they're practicing their craft, right? And then practice leads are basically just more experienced and more senior and have more accountability. So they are responsible for advancing that discipline.
So if you're a practitioner, then you just listed off about 11 different things that a practitioner could potentially do. So do you ever have practitioners who go, I don't really know what it is I do because my job title is practitioner?
No, we have, so you'll be a strategy practitioner, a design practitioner, a creative practitioner. So they know what they're doing.
So it's more about the fact that you sort of, not necessarily hierarchy, but you go, okay, am I right in thinking that a practice lead would be mainly client-faced, whereas a practitioner would be sort of more mainly working on the work? Is that the division?
No, both are working on the work. Both have access to the client. It's the practice lead that is more responsible and accountable for the project and the discipline.
So we've all seen Mad Men, and that's what we imagine your industry is like. I'm sure it's very different than what it was 70 years ago. But with Mad Men, there was a direct progression upwards. So you've always got another job you can potentially be going for in terms of promotion. Do you not find that it's a little restrictive if you've only got one place you can go? Once you're a practice lead, there's nowhere else to go. What have I misunderstood about that?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. It's something I think about a lot because, we have people, people coming into the company, people that have been with us since the beginning for 5 years. But really, you're talking about progress, and I think progress. Yes, promotions are important, but how often do they need to happen? And compensation is progress, so that still happens, and they know that happens. And also, we're talking about bringing in, we're in 2026. Oh my gosh. And we've heard loads about Gen Z need to be managed differently and all this sort of stuff. So status is less of a thing for the younger generations. Yes, it's still important. We all have egos, but it's more, what else can your job and your company, the company you work for bring to your daily life, right? So the flexibility, that's incredibly important. Not getting burnt out. A lot of younger people think about their mental health, increasingly more so, which is a good thing. And, not prepared to sort of do what it was that we did before. So if things are changing, why are then, organizational structures still the same? I guess is the question.
You've worked for some major agencies. Like, you name it and you've probably worked there. But if someone comes in from one of these agencies, let's just pick one out, the WPP or something like that, they come in and they're interviewing for a job, does it confuse them that they don't have this job title thing?
Maybe, but then they're not right for GentleForces. So we've had people that, we're basically talking about tradition versus modernity. And there are people that, the industry is great in so many ways and the industry is not great in so many ways. And people are realizing that and changing that in the way that they think they can contribute to that. And those that come along that have perhaps only had a very traditional career ladder or experience, they perhaps might find it more challenging to sort of interview or join GentleForces if that happened. But really, it's about mindset. They might have had a traditional background, but maybe they're showing that they've got more of a growth mindset or more of an attitude that suits the modern practice of where we're going.
Without naming names or throwing anyone under the bus, what is it you'd like to see changed in the industry? Something which seems like you're doing at the moment.
There's still these invisible structures, and then we're pedestaling certain types of people, leaders, or disciplines. And I'm just not interested in that. I'm interested in how can everyone sort of reach their potential? How can we collaborate? How can we get to great work, whoever you are? Because why, without sounding too abstract or sort of ethereal, but, we're all human and we all have potential. That's basically, I think, even, Nike talk a lot about that in their world, but it's true. So why are we placing restrictions or limits or walls or, barriers in the way of people's potential? And we're a people business, and it's human ingenuity, it's human creativity, that is all of us. And then there are certain craft and skills, some that are maybe perhaps more designers or more conceptual or more strategic, whatever it may be. But I don't think anyone's really challenging that. I mean, I'm sure there are some out there, but we walk into this Mad Men setup perhaps, and they would have had all of the levels, the account man, the account, director, the managing director and so on, the ECD, the creative director, they would have had so many levels, including the secretary, who would have been female. But, that was, what did you say, 70 years ago? So what are we doing? So I think I'm just seeing a better way and just doing it and seeing how that goes. And of course it suits some and of course it doesn't suit others. But it's suited a lot of people that have stayed here, and even new hires who probably, think they're going to go and get their next promotion to a creative director or something, but they come here or a head of creative, and they come here and they're creative practice lead, so but what they value is the independence of the company, the culture, the team, the openness, all of that. So, that's incredibly important, as well as structure, but it's how you are wanting to be structured to serve your output and serve your clients.
Your approach probably makes some of the more traditional companies a little uncomfortable, but I've heard you say get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Is that what you say? Have I got that right?
We are problem solving. We are coming up with creative ideas, creative thinking, strategic, flips or reimagining brands. That takes a sort of level of creativity, a level of discomfort. Of course it does, because if everything is comfortable, if everything is fine, I mean, there's nothing fresh about that. It's probably been done 20 times. So it's really important that we're interrogating, we're pushing ideas around, we're riffing, we're challenging each other respectfully where and when it needs to. But when I think people hear challenge, I think it sounds like a fight. It's not at all. It's more just being able to feel that you can question a thought or build on it and have that dialogue. I think in some companies, people are too scared to say anything, too scared to sort of fail. We've heard that a lot. And so really, I'm just trying to create an environment where it's more open and more direct, I guess, more, there's more discussion around the thing. And that's what clients are paying for us, is to get to the thing. And when I say the thing, I'm assuming you know what I'm talking about: the idea, the magic, the solution, the concept, whatever it might be. But they're paying for us to get to that, and that's the hard work that we've got to do.
So this is segued perfectly into my next question. So if you're embracing the chaos of creativity, which sounds amazing, but you also need to get to a deliverable, to the thing, to the idea for the client, how do you stop it just becoming essentially like a kindergarten where everyone's got amazing ideas, but nothing actually gets done?
That's why you need to balance chaos and order. So, I think one of my old bosses at Wieden & Kennedy actually used to say I was the queen of frameworks. And my current, my managing partner here, Nathan, he would say, yeah, you have the chaos and then suddenly it gets a bit too out of control, and then you apply the order, the control, perhaps. And so they both, again, I sort of come back, maybe it's, as we're talking, it's this intuition, it's being more human, right? So there is always two sides to us, right? You and I are both masculine and feminine. I have a masculine side, I have a feminine side. They're in life, there's chaos and order. You can't have one without the other. So it's just about, acknowledging that in your process. Otherwise, I think what you get to, and in some places I've worked at, or even in some places I haven't worked at, there's too much order, and that's where you get the generic output. And then in some, there's too much chaos, and then they can't deliver at a level of scale, right? When you're working with really big global brands, which we do. And so it's allowing for that creativity to happen, allowing for that strategic thinking to happen. For me, I think about, my background is strategy, and I think about that as, it's actually quite creative, but the leaps that you can make strategically. So, strategy, you probably think of consultants like, BCG or McKinsey or Bain, and it's all very logical, and that's great. But you also need to apply the illogical to make that jump. Otherwise, it's all sounding, you're working on a brand in a category, and you're doing that logical process, and then you're working on another brand in the same category next month. I mean, it's the same, isn't it? So you need to apply some tension, some friction. You know, you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable to be able to take those different trajectories in your mind or with the team that you're working with.
Could you talk us through what it would look like if we were sat at the table with your guys and you were putting together a project and it's chaotic and then you pull it towards order? Is an example of a project you can think of?
I would say every project, right? Because this is our process. So really you'll get a brief, and we're interdisciplinary. So you'll have the core team across strategy, creative design, and client partnerships sitting around the table. And we're basically just having a conversation. And it's very, some people might have brainstorms, or, some people might, just give it to the first person in the part of the process, in which case that would be strategy. And they go and sit in a room for, back in the day it was 5 weeks. Now maybe it's 5 hours, but still they would be isolated to think about that on their own. And so you're not being able to sort of hear different perspectives and sort of make those connections. So we're basically having a conversation in this room, for example, and hopefully laughing. That's really important. And there's no end goal at that point. We're just instinctively trying to find what this thing is, understanding what world it plays in, how it can show up differently in that world, or how it can have a distinct point of view in that space. And we're just throwing a lot of things around. And then probably client partnerships will get involved and say, right, okay, or we'll have another meeting and it will be another session, and then we'll start to sort of divide and conquer and do what we need to do. So yeah, the project plan and the deliverables and all of that, that's the order that comes in. But yeah, it's quite, I feel very comfortable playing between the two poles in one session. And I'm trying to, my role really now is a facilitator of that, or a conductor of that, and how I can, help the practice leads to do that as we go forward. But to be honest, I think anyone can really do it. And it's really building muscle and experience in the room.
So we've got this idea that I've put in my head of like democratized chaos. So there's like a huge table. Everyone's got amazing ideas. This is cool. My instinct would be there needs to be one person who's got the final say on creativity and the final say. Does that happen, or is it against or democratized?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the easiest way to sort of explain it is diverging, converging. So we need to open up and expand our minds, our thinking, expand the brief, right? I would say 9 times out of 10, a brief comes from a client, and sometimes briefs don't come. But you try and understand it together. But an ask or a brief will come, and the actual solution is not what they've asked for in the brief. Is the one that gets signed off. It's a bit like, when you're looking for a house and you're like, I need the house to be this, this, and this, let's say Victorian with a back garden, and you end up buying a new build penthouse apartment instead. You think you want those things. And then, so, that is the reality. And so we're expanding the brief. We're actually, we're understanding the parameters or the tent poles of it. And then we're sort of trying to solve the bigger thing. And we do it a lot in collaboration with our clients. We have to. It's their brand and their business. They know it best. But then, the first couple of sessions, we don't need to make decisions, right? We're still diverging. But when we need to make decisions, it's the practice lead of that discipline. So if it's a strategic project, the strategic practice lead will make that decision. If it's a creative outcome, the creative practice lead will make that decision.
So with all this chaos, it sounds like a cool place. I would love to work there, but it also feels like somewhere that if you're not careful, you could get burnt out because you've not got that order. I mean, have you ever seen that? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, we're seeing that across industry, aren't we? And, before I talk about it as a potential reaction to this, we are seeing it out there, and we're seeing, do everything more for less. We're seeing, the geopolitical situation that's obviously having a burden on us, the post-pandemic. This is really, really important, and it's a bit, I liken it. We work a lot with sports brands. We actually founded with building H&M Move from scratch, so building a sports brand for H&M globally. Really incredible project. And in sport, you work really hard and then you recover. There's this the mindset of, I'm not saying we work really hard in that sense, but you're figuring something out. You're in that chaos, but then you can't do that. You're not doing that sort of every hour. There is the balance of chaos and order, and then there's quiet time for the order, and then someone needs to work on the deliverable. So it's, as I said, it's a balance. It's not just chaos. It's chaos and order, and diverging and converging, and just knowing where in the project that needs to happen to get to the solution.
From a personal point of view, if you're embracing this beautiful chaos at work, which is controlled chaos, but still chaos, then in your personal life, do you prefer things to be ordered outside of work? Or are you just as chaotic?
Very good question, Al. My husband will probably be listening to this. It's funny. I'm definitely more chaos than he is, but overall, we're very quiet at home. And I think, it's just a different expression of yourself. So you've got the concept, obviously, of extroverts and introverts. And again, it's binary, right? When we talk about boxing people in things. And then there's, I think back in the day it was ambivert, and now is it introvert or something? But I am both. I can be very, it's about, as we all know, introversion is, when you need to recover on your own, and you get energy from being alone. And extroversion is you get energy from others and, other stimulus. I need both. That's me personally. Some people in the team, very introverted, some very extroverted. At our AGM end of last year, I did a, how shall I say it, a sort of movement exercise around chaos and order. And we all, I mean, this is where I'm probably a bit mad, but, it was like, okay, everyone now behave like chaos, right? And people were just in their body doing whatever they were doing, right? Okay, now order. And we had two groups, and one was chaos and one was order. And then we switched it around. And then we just discussed what did that feel like? And a lot of the people who are typically orderly was like, oh, I felt like there was a freedom of thinking, and I did, and expression and ideas. And then the people that were typically chaos were like, yeah, it's quite exhausting. So again, you sort of need to, there's pros and cons to these things, and you need to just find that balance. It's always about the tension and the balance. And, it's my responsibility and also the practice leads who in the leadership team to make sure that as a company and as and all the the people that work here, we're managing that.
I want to work at your place. This sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the word interdisciplinary, I think, before when you were describing that table full of people. I want to know, first of all, in a creative agency or creative practice, what does that mean? And secondly, let's dive a bit more deep into how you get all these different people and teams working together as one.
Interdisciplinary. You've probably heard of multidisciplinary, where basically you are working on your specific discipline and you're collaborating. Interdisciplinary is you're working on your specific discipline, but you're working together to create something new. And so, I think typically in organizations, we might have I've seen a lot of silos, and, the objective is to collaborate, right? But I really see the benefit of when you're, again, it takes a lot. I'm sure we're going to get on to how hard this is and change is hard, right? and I'm willing to do it, and I'm willing to see what comes out of it for people individually and for the company and for the people we work with. But yeah, interdisciplinary is working together to create something new, and that's what we're here to do. So if I can enable that process, if I can enable those conditions, and if I can enable that structure, then we're only going to make better work.
So let's imagine that you were crazy enough to employ me.
I'd love to, Al. I'm not sure you'd leave your podcast, though.
Got that on tape. So I came up like as a copywriter, self-taught, read all the stuff. I'm quite proud of the copy I create. However, if I was sitting at a table and I've got someone who is from a slightly different area, and I give them my copywriting and they start criticizing it, pulling it apart in a nice way, pulling it apart, my ego's going to be bruised. I'm going to be a little bit like, hang on a minute. I'm the copywriter. You're the creative. I don't know any other job titles, but you're the person who does this. How are you resolving that conflict? I'm guessing you don't employ me in the first place, but imagine you do have that conflict. How are you resolving it?
As I said before, like, the culture is open. And so one of the other things that I think is really important, and we're just like any other company like this, but we're trying to get better at is, well, we're probably not like just any other company, is feedback, right? And I talk about feedback as a gift. And, we need to be able to discuss. I mean, this is not about unpicking what you've written, Al, if we're here having a chat about this, but we're not about unpicking what you've written. It's more higher level than that. It's the idea that you're getting across, and then you'll go away and refine it. So it's less about the craft that is required and only a copywriter, can do. No, an art director is not necessarily going to be able to do that. But what we're discussing is, let's say you've written a brand manifesto for a new luxury brand or a new skincare brand or something. But it's not just your words, it's the strategic, positioning of it. It's the creative transformation of where we're going to take the skincare brand, and you've written the words. So really, you're working side by side with the strategist and the creative practice lead, let's say, who's conceptually trying to, see the potential of it. So yeah, it's not the micro part of it. It's more the bigger thinking.
If I did a word count for the word practice in my notes I've got here, it would come up far more often than any other podcast brief I've ever done. You seem to really like the word practice. I've got down here, we've got practice leads, practitioners, practice weeks. You call yourself a practice, not an agency. What's this obsession with the word practice?
Again, coming back to what we do, but it's not fait accompli, right? It's not done. And so practice, you're practicing, you're keeping developing, learning, growing, adapting, evolving, expanding. You have to. There's no ceiling, right? Or and that's, again, links back to structures of, okay, the ECD knows everything, or the creative chairman knows everything. No, they're still learning. And I'm sure if some people who had those titles were here, they'd probably agree. So it's really about expanding, opening, deepening our practice. And how can we do that in our day-to-day jobs, and practice weeks being something we do every quarter to step outside of the business as usual. And very much inspired by architect practices. I think that was, I almost wish I'd done there's various degrees I'm sure we wish we'd done when we were doing the degrees, but I really love that feels to me pretty interdisciplinary, which is, of course, architects have their own discipline and craft, but my cousin is a phenomenal architect, and you've got to be very good at maths. You've got to be, so you've got to be mathematical, you've got to be, visionary to come up with the idea, and you've got to have the skill of drawing and putting the thing together. So they're very, what would typically be quite competing skill sets, and I just love the idea of bringing that together in a lateral way.
So it never occurred to me before that it's a nuance of English, I suppose, but an architect practice, you wouldn't say an architect agency, you would say an architect practice. So it sounds like I'm really flogging this horse, but I just want to understand, what is the semantics between practice and agency?
Yeah, great question. For me, agency has been around since whenever, but you're really, as an agency, the work has been outsourced to you and you are supplying something, right? That could be one definition. Another one could be, has connotations around it in our industry. And I think for me, there's been so many connotations applied to things that just don't feel right. They don't feel inclusive. They don't feel progressive. And they feel quite fixed. And so I feel like we've all got an idea of agency, whereas it was really important for me when setting up GentleForces and as we go about things day to day, that it's an expansive space, that it's somewhere where people are going to grow in many ways and going to learn, and they're going to develop their craft, they're going to hone their craft. And, I'm just like anyone else. I've got to turn up to work every day and I want to enjoy what I do and I want to keep learning. I'm in my early 40s. I want to keep learning, and I think everyone else does as well.
I suppose the irony is that agency implies free will, but actually the traditional agency model is that you just go in, you deliver work, and you don't have free will.
Free will. I love that idea. And, we're hybrid working here. No one's checking on anyone on, whatever they're doing. It's really, they're accountable for for what they're doing in their projects, in their discipline, and with the team. And that is cultivated in culture, and it's not easy, but it's done, and now, or it's being done, and now the culture holds up. So obviously, as a founder, you establish a culture and you lead by example, and the company is really a reflection of you. I guess that's what founders are, right? Whichever company you founded. But at some point, for that to become scalable, it needs to work without you, right? Or it needs to, be imparted. And so I'm very proud of that, which is the culture holds itself and it evolves, and so on.
I just want to ask you about this night vision that I believe people have described you as having this night vision. What the hell are they talking about?
This was when I was working at WPP, actually, and we founded a creative accelerator, right? So for those who don't know, WPP is, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners do, that's a huge holding company, a huge communications and creative and technology holding company. And, it's like a big, what do you call them? Like aircraft carrier or a big tanker. And so, we set up WPP Black Ops, and it was basically looking at, so one of their biggest clients, Procter & Gamble, sponsors the Olympics, and it was for SK-II, which is a huge Japanese skincare brand, big in Japan and China and even the US. And it was sponsoring Tokyo 2020, which then became 2021. And, the typical way wasn't getting the types of creativity and ideas, and I would say chaos that the CEO of SK-II wanted. He actually loves chaos, this guy who now works somewhere else. And so we basically ignored that setup and then created something else. And This was thinking about how can we bring people in from outside WPP to create something, and how can we, and from within WPP, and just set up something new. And it was incredible. We launched with 6 female athletes, including Simone Biles, the greatest gymnast of all time, and Japanese athletes and Chinese athletes, and which are huge in their respective countries. And it was a huge animated anthology that was launched around Tokyo Olympics. So I'm not sure that would have happened otherwise.
And was that the seed of GentleForce's practice?
Yes and no. I would say there's been seeds. It's almost what we've been chatting about in this podcast, which is, my experience over the years and what's felt restrictive and what's felt enabling my own approach to life, I guess, all of that. But yes, it happened probably it was 2 jobs before I set up GentleForces. After that, I was at Adidas headquarters. But yeah, I think they all connect to each other, don't they?
You are groundbreaking in a lot of ways. You've been described as having night vision. Described, in fact, I've got so many sound bites from you. I haven't got time to put them all in. This is all different. This is all breaking it and rebuilding it. So what went wrong when you did that?
A lot. I mean, for any startup founder, you always get everything wrong at the beginning. A lot of time was wasted, I think, because you're sort of setting up to do something new. So we're talking a lot about whatever it is we're talking about, and that wastes time, and time is money. And so, but I think, but then some brilliance comes out of that. So I would say, when regardless if it's a practice or not, I think for any startup founder, you always look back and go, gosh, that was a big thing there, wasn't it? That could have been done differently. And, a lot of it will be to do with, there's no processes at all. And so that's not efficient. But the whole point that there's no processes is because you've been able to set something up. It comes in both ways. But I would just say, we're really coming into our own the last couple of years. The first 3 years were very challenging. We were founded in the pandemic. We, had one huge global client. It was a bit of an anomaly. I imagine like founders set up just eating baked beans out of their bedroom, you know what I mean? Whereas we had huge trust in, I had an ex-client from Adidas, Simon, who set up, who had the task of setting up this new sports brand at H&M, and he called me. I think I was the second person after he called his mum. And so that meant, well, I didn't know this at the time, but, that was huge. And the trust to build something, for me to build something to solve that need.
Jeff Bezos is kind of renowned for, it's maybe oversimplification, but Jeff Bezos is renowned for saying brand is how people describe it when you're not in the room. How do you think your team would describe working at GentleForces if you weren't in the room?
I think we did a survey actually last week. We did the other week. And what I was seeing coming up was sort of calm. It's a lot of calm. I think we were talking about what's it like to work in this space. And just coming back to your question about being comfortable with the uncomfortable, it was really important that this didn't feel corporate and uncomfortable, but that the space felt comfortable. And, no harsh lighting and, more natural materials and different spaces. So the team have talked about the space being really calm, really easy to connect with co-workers, really open, really welcoming. I heard all of those words. But then in terms of working at GentleForces, I think they're proud. I think, we've got people that I'm proud of that have been here since the beginning, so nearly 5 years. and they're here and they're talking about the future. And I think they're really proud that they've been part of something that is, that they're building that's different. And I think they can also see that, a lot of people want to come and work with us. And so, that makes them, feel good as well.
Imagine I have an accountancy firm, right? And we're not, well, actually you do call them accountancy practices, but imagine I have an accountancy firm. We're going to be working on very different things and ideas than you. We don't want chaos. We very much want order. But do you still think the 2 job title idea would work in a business like that?
I would say it's possible. And I just want to sort of take a step back to sort of ask ourselves, when everything is changing around us, right? It's like that film, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, or whatever it's called, but I think it won an Oscar or something. But everything is changing, like everything. So I would say, why are we not open to changing first or embracing that change? And so, let's take an example of a manufacturing firm. I don't actually know what the titles are, but why couldn't you have plant leads and plant, workers? I mean, another term probably, I'm not au fait with all of that. But really, we're just talking about doing the work that we're doing versus, and you've got younger people coming through, right? Younger people coming through. It's a different world. It's a different generation. And so, we're not adapting at all. So arguably, is it more risk that there's a company approach that's 2 titles, or is it more risk to carry on with the status quo?
So imagine someone's listening to this and goes, yes, the 2 job titles, I love this, but they've currently got 30 job titles. How would you coach them into starting to reduce that down to 2?
I don't think it's about 2. I think the number 2, I think it's about what is their main output? What is their main focus? What kind of culture do they want? And, for me, I want a culture of everyone learning, evolving, adapting, and being open and practicing, and making great work. Whereas, if there's 30 job titles, the funny thing is, sorry, just coming back to that thing that I just said about the risk, where's more risk? The funny thing is, we are seeing world over, regardless of industry, right? Industry agnostic, we are seeing streamlining, consolidation, efficiencies, what does that then result in? Redundancies. And so, do we need the 30 levels? Probably not. So that's what I'm saying about, how can we optimize, refine, build for the work that we're doing and build a structure around that. And you've kind of got to be quite bold to do it in a very established organization, but it is totally possible. And it may be that you go from 30 to 15, but without, this is a whole other thing in terms of redundancies and all of the rest of it. But I'm not saying make redundancies. I'm just saying, how can you transition into something that works better for the company? We've just seen Kimberly-Clark, acquire Kenvue, who used to be Johnson & Johnson. We're seeing various acquisitions to streamline because there's not enough work, there's not enough anything. So what I'm saying is, with everything dynamically changing and with a new workforce coming through, I think the question is more, how can you evolve your organizational structure to meet the needs of today?
That was Danni Mohammed from GentleForce, and I bet there aren't many leaders who thought about an org chart quite like that. 3 really important takeaways for leaders managing creative teams. Number 1, design your structure around your output, not your industry's habits. Danni didn't flatten the hierarchy to be trendy. She asked what structure would best serve the work. Job titles might be the most expensive thing in your org chart, not in salary terms, but in the potential they quietly cap. So ask yourself, are your titles defining roles or defining limits?
And lesson 2, a calm culture is a competitive advantage, and it's built, not just stumbled into. Danni's team keeps using the word calm to describe working at GentleForce. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when founders are deliberate about removing the things that drain energy, like ego-feeding titles, invisible hierarchies, and unnecessary politics before they take root.
And lesson 3, most workplaces need both chaos and order, and the skill is knowing when to switch. The teams that consistently produce brilliant work aren't always the most orderly, and they're not the most chaotic. They're the ones where leaders know when to open the room up and when to bring it back in. It turns out that calm teams who are able to embrace chaos do bolder work. You can find Danni and GentleForce at gentleforces.com. We'll put the link in the show notes.
That's all for today. Go count your job titles. This is Truth Lies in Work. We'll see you next week.